Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last live Q&A for this conference. I'm joined by Robert LeBlanc, who lives up in Canada. Welcome, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Very, very excited to be here and humbled to have been asked to be here. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we have, share, if you wouldn't mind, Robert, what's a little bit of your story? How did you get to where you are? What do you do? And what led you to this conference?
Okay. I guess first of all, I have to just say, don't be overly fooled by the French name, and if the accent kind of starts to slip in a bit. I actually grew up in the Greater Toronto area speaking English until I was a teenager, and it was as a teenager, having gone to live for a summer in France and then university year in Brussels, that I learned my French, and now I'm a high school French immersion religion teacher. So French is the language of my day. So how did I get here? I don't know. Like everyone, the path is long and winding, and here and there.
Well, tell us about your the talk that you gave is about how marriage strengthens you in your family.
Yeah. So yeah, how the Catholic faith actually strengthens our marriage. And I don't want to go too much into it because I know the talk is scheduled for later this afternoon, and if I do the talk now, no one's going to tune in later, right? But something. The talk is generally an hour long, and trying to condense that, I was happy to even get it down to half an hour. Was tough. But one of the things I didn't speak to on that was 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to pick up St. John Paul the Great's Theology of the Body. And the deeper I got into the theology of the body, the more my love for my wife grew. Right? And the biggest thing, and I do talk about it when I talk to my students about it too, the biggest thing that came out for me was the notion of being complementary, that you know, we're made for each other, and that my wife's strengths, my wife was conceived with her strengths to be able to make up for my weaknesses, and my strengths to make up for my wife's weaknesses. And so it's something for every man that's looking to better understand the sacrament of marriage, to better understand his love for his wife. I would suggest Theology of the Body. The actual book itself by St. John Paul the Great, it's a tough read. It's usually I'll go through a book week, 2 weeks, 6 months.
Oh wow!
I put into that because you have to try. And I would read a paragraph, and I'd go back and read the paragraph again, and I'd go back and read the paragraph again. Now I know there's all kinds of other compendiums and books that are out there on that, and so from reading the Theology of the Body, my love for my wife grew more and more deeply. And because I teach religion to 14 and 15-year-olds, the questions of love and marriage and sexuality, it's all part of that. And so you start thinking, well, how can you start to explain that to them? And the more I looked at Theology of the Body, the more I contemplated our own marriage, the more I saw these 6 aspects. Yeah, so I always have to refer my notes of trust, forgiveness, humility, service, thanksgiving, and prayer, and how those parts of our faith really make our marriage that much better, that much stronger. And I say right from the top, our marriage isn't perfect, and I know our marriage isn't perfect because I'm part of it, right? I'm in there, and as much as I like to think I'm perfect, I'm far from that. And I'm outside of reading Theology of the Body, contemplating my own marriage. I'm not a marriage expert. I know there's some of the speakers that are like that. They're marriage counselors, and that's what they do for a living. If you're looking for those deeper, stronger questions about that, or those would be the guys to turn to.
Well, let me just say, don't sell yourself short. In one sense, just being a married Catholic in the modern world and then being a religion teacher to teenagers is very much a front line in terms of the cultural differences between our parents' generation and our own. So I think that's a really great segue into our first question here. And for those who are joining us, go ahead and if you have any questions for Robert to tackle, maybe drop them in the comments and we'll look at answering them. But let's move into our first question here from John. He says, how do young Catholics better share their faith with the nuns? And we'll just clarify what the word nuns, I think that Bishop Barron might have been somebody who's popularized that term, but they are the people who no longer identify with a particular religious affiliation. They may still very well be spiritual, but they're not a card-carrying, religious, follower. So in your experience, Robert, what have been some of the ways that young Catholics can better share their faith with the nuns?
Well, young Catholics, old Catholics, I think when it comes to sharing the faith, it's the same, and that's being a witness. I've heard it said somewhere that you can't argue someone into the faith, but you have to bring them into the faith through witness and by living the faith. But the young Catholics and the young nuns, as John was talking about, need to have that witness from the younger generation. We have in our archdiocese, there's a great group that's called Regeneration, and it's a group of young people. They're mid-20s at most, and they've signed on for a year, and they live in community, and they go out to the high schools and talk about sexuality, and they talk about chastity. And so we've had them come in to speak to roomfuls of 14-year-olds about chastity. And I think it's great. It's not like they're coming in on my teacher turf that they're taking over, but it's I look at it and I think I realize the 14-year-old needs to hear this talk from the 24-year-old as opposed from the 50-year-old in the shirt and tie who reminds them more of their parents, if not even their grandparents. And so it's by living that faith. And we were talking before about the Regenerated Conference, Renewed Hope Conference, and the talk there that I spoke about being a joyful witness and living a faith that's authentic and not being afraid. I speak as an adult, not being afraid to sit down in the staff lunchroom and make the sign of the cross and pray before meals. And one of the speakers in this conference was speaking about that. It was either Dave Denucio or Taylor Schroll. I mentioned that. I was watching the videos back to back yesterday, and the same messages, but they get a little bit melded together. But being that authentic witness. And so when I talk to my students about that and we talk about prayer, I'll challenge them. How many of you, when you go to the cafeteria at lunchtime, stop and make the sign of the cross and pray before you and I always say to them, if you need to pray over food, it's the food that's coming out of the high school cafeteria. Like that, you need to pray for yourself and for the cooks on that one. Dressing modestly, not being afraid to be authentic, not being afraid to be who they are, and that's really that's what's going to start to win souls over. It's so difficult, I think, for the younger generation because there's always that desire to fit in and to belong. So again, for this younger generation is then finding other faith-filled Catholics to be able to support one another as well. And we'll see that within the school, that those groups will come together and coalesce.
I think you and I have been on this rodeo before with the idea of being a magnetic Catholic and the whole "I want what you have" approach. And maybe a thought here for John: if you are, especially if you're young, and you are looking to share your faith, one consideration maybe to bear in mind is the fact that because you are young, you have some things going for you, and then some things not yet. You're not old enough, maybe with enough life experience. Raise my hand here, to be able to to bring a lot of confidence that comes from years of experience and so on. So instead, being a young Catholic, there should be a sense of joy and a sense of confidence that you're in the right place, that you're on the right journey, because that's something that a lot of the nuns don't have, is a sense of confidence that they are living the right life, that there is a purpose to their life, that there's a reason to be alive at all for many of them, apart from just the next Netflix hit, or whatever. So being able to be that one person perhaps in your group who's not proselytizing, which I think Pope Francis came out and said we need to calm down about that. We need to be authentic witnesses, so that people look at your lifestyle and they're like, this person has joy, this person has confidence, they're real, they're what's up. I want to find out what it is about their lifestyle that makes them so attractive.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, it's making me think, but it's to have that joy in the hard times, in the difficult times. So when things aren't going right, but still maintaining that calm and that self-confidence and self-awareness. And as you were talking about too, and again, I just turned 50 last Friday, so it's the youth. As much as I like to think it was yesterday, it's long in the rearview mirror, and you forget that you didn't necessarily have all of those life experiences there. But again, that notion of being authentic and magnetic, of who you are in this moment, knowing that you're on that journey. So not trying to be someone you aren't, and not trying to be the next big evangelist and arguing with people.
Yeah,
that's going to push people away. But just being comfortable with who you are in Christ. And
what I think is also, I think a huge attractor for a lot of us is to not be afraid of your, your vocation, maybe what you're called to in life, but especially if you're a young Catholic, you're still figuring that out. So a huge connection with other people are cultural interests and passions, like movies and games, and not being afraid to have fun with those things. A lot of people struggle with being deeply spiritual and religious because they think that automatically means if I check into Jesus, I got to check out from fun. And it's like, no, it's not that at all.
Yeah, and I think the best example I can give of that is through Facebook. We'll put out videos or faith-filled things, and they get some recognition. But when I put out there, and it's usually on a Sunday evening, I'm having a nice craft beer. In the summer, I'm having a nice cold craft beer and reading theology, or through the winter, I'm having a nice glass of wine. It's Sunday evening. It's time for smooth jazz, wine and theology, right? And that just lights up, right? And it's reminiscent of Chesterton's. Is one of my favorite line of his. The pint, the pipe, and the cross all have a place in Catholicism. Right. And so just because you are a faith-filled person doesn't mean that you have to shut everything else down.
Yeah.
Right.
If the gents, listening in or participating haven't heard of the saint, or actually I'm not sure if he's a saint, Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. I think he's a saint now.
I can't remember. And it was feast day last week, and I can't remember if it was blessed or saint.
Turn of the century young man. I think it was, oh my goodness, First World War, maybe. Anyway, he was, he died of, typhus or something, the typhoid fever. His whole thing was that he was from a very wealthy family. His father ran one of the prominent newspapers in Rome. I think it was very actively
It was very anti-clerical.
Yeah, La Stampa. But he was, I think there was still, his mother was Catholic or deeply faithful. And so his whole thing was sneaking out early in the morning to go to Mass and then come back and sort of do his schoolwork. And he was unashamed to be Catholic, but he didn't rub it in everybody else's face. He ended up being this incredibly uh, strange and attractive person because he loved his cigars as he got older. He loved his laughter. Almost all the photos that we have of him today have this massive ear-splitting grin. He was filled with an infectious love of life and love of living out his relationship with Christ. And it was only after, with his death, that the crowd, the streets of Rome were choked with people who showed up for his funeral, and his parents couldn't understand, who are all these people. They found out all of these were the poor that he'd been ministering to in his off hours, buying them medication, I think it was, bringing them food and clothes, and nobody knew about this.
Yeah.
And this incredible witness of joy and action. So perfect example right there.
Yeah, and that love of life and that love of living.
Yes.
And as you're saying, the story is very reminiscent of Saint John Paul, and what made him attractive to the younger generation and to the married couples. He loved being out in creation, and he would be kayaking and canoeing and skiing and mountain climbing with them. And it was the same with Pier Giorgio, that he was a mountain climber. Like, he was very active.
Yeah. You know what I think is an interesting sort of follow-up is a question, or sort of an ongoing quest that I have. I think you and I talked about this a little while back, but it had to do with why were the missionaries so effective when they were witnessing and ministering to, let's say, the Vikings, right? Or the Indians, and all of these people who would put pride of place on manly violence and action for maintaining order in the world. And then you get these tonsured clerics showing up. And I think it was Chesterton who said something like the three vows that the like the Franciscans or the British missionaries would take would just blow these ancient peoples away. They would show up and they're like, "Oh, you're here to take our land. You're here to take over." And they'd be like, "No, we've taken a vow of poverty. We don't own anything." "Oh, well, you're here for our women. You're here to take our women." It's like, no, actually, vow of chastity, celibacy. That's not it. Oh, what was the other one? It was chastity, celibacy, and
obedience.
Yeah, and I think, what was the other one? You're here to take control over our governments. And it's like, no, actually, we have a spirit of obedience. We obey the Pope, and we're here to support you. It's like, oh, what the heck are you here for?
Yeah.
And then they were like, I'm here to bring you a message you haven't heard yet, a message and of incredible good news, and blah blah blah. And then they would just simply live out that witness. I think Father Matteo Ricci, I'm not sure if he's canonized or not, had an amazing life learning and loving the Chinese culture, the Chinese lifestyle, so that he could live the Catholic thing from within their culture, and created this incredible witness.
And when I speak to my students about the missionary call, I mean, you're hitting on actually on all of the people that we talk about, and becoming a part of the culture without the culture overtaking the faith. And so we talk about Matteo Ricci. As you were speaking, I was thinking of Saint Jean de Brébeuf. Up here in our region of Canada, is a French Jesuit missionary that brought the faith here, and he wrote a series of guidelines for missionaries to come. Make sure that you're always carrying your weight on the portage. Make sure that you're not slowing down the paddling. And he wrote a French Huron like a dictionary to translate the two languages. And so, again, for young people, and when I talk to my students about this, it's like, who would make the best kind of evangelist, or who would make the best kind of missionary within your social grouping? And we talk about being comfortable with the social media, the way that you dress. I mean, again, I spoke earlier about dressing modestly. You can still dress cool, but modestly. Have just the way you look, the vocabulary that is used, and again, that comes back to what I was saying earlier. I completely get it that these 14, 15-year-olds are going to hear the message better from someone who's 5-10 years older than them, because they're part of their culture and they have the vocabulary. where the 50-year-old guy is just a very different dynamic.
Yeah, and especially I think the first world West, we have a particular culture, and when you see how, well, like individualism, personal freedom being a huge thing. So to have a religious person show up and tell them, oh, I'm here to control your life, take your money, and suck all the fun out of being alive, because I'm religious and you need to join, or I'll have nothing to do with you. It's like, that's how most people
Say,
see.
bye-bye.
Who wants to be a part of that? Nobody does. I haven't seen The Handmaid's Tale, but that's, that is the cultural attitude so many people have towards being religious. I mean, you have kind of your passive religious, but then you've got your active, uh, religious Catholic people, and a lot of nuns are afraid of that, because it's like it's got to be the Inquisition, soul sucking, joyless. So for us to turn around and be like, no, I don't want your money, I don't want to control your life, I want to help you live your best life, because I'm trying to live mine, and I know that if I can help you live yours, you're just going to enjoy life more.
Yeah, no,
so
exactly.
I think. Go ahead.
And I was just one other thing, when I've been asked, when I've been out speaking, and it's the older generation will ask, what should I do about my son or my daughter who's kind of fallen away from the faith? And again, like, especially with the parents, that they come in and talk a parent-teacher interview, and they're saying, my teenage child, they're kind of falling away from the faith, and I say to them, a lot of times in the teenage years, the faith is like garlic. And so you take the garlic bulb and you plant it end of October, beginning of November. And through those dark, wintry days, it lies dormant. And so it's still there, it's still on the ground, but you can't see it. And then in the springtime, you will eventually start to see the sprout come out, and will eventually grow up. And then you're end of July, beginning of August, then you're able to harvest the garlic. And so with the younger generation, and again, because they're just trying to figure out who they are,
right,
then that faith is kind of lying, or it's there, the seeds have been planted. It's just going to take time for the Holy Spirit to water them.
When you mentioned garlic, I thought you were going to take that a different way, which could have been funny, which is like, garlic is phenomenal when it's with something else.
Yes.
Garlic is awesome in spaghetti, maybe in a pizza sauce. Everybody loves a good pizza, but you eat garlic by yourself, you'll push everybody away. You chow down on it like an apple. Nobody wants to talk to you. So if you have that attitude towards sharing your faith, like this is the only thing, as opposed to it plus what it does in a lived,
I see exactly, and that it adds the flavor to, so that our faith can add the flavor to living within the society now.
Along the same lines, it's like when Christ says we're meant to be the salt of the earth, and if salt itself loses its flavor, what good is it? And I was thinking about that a couple of months back and realizing, if we're called to be the salt of the earth, it's meant then to be like salt on a steak, or salted caramels, not salt on a wound. Nobody's interested in salt for that kind of purpose.
No. Exactly.
Let's share over, or jump over to a question here from Russel in the last 10 minutes we have here. So he says, how do I continue my formation as a Catholic man in the midst of all the unrest surrounding me?
Come to the Immortal Combat Conference, right? So how finding like-minded gentlemen in your parish and in your region. You'd be surprised, maybe even at work. Again, I teach in a Catholic high school. You'd be surprised, though, how hard it is to find truly faith-filled people. Now there are many, and everyone's doing their best. But I found one really good friend there, and we're able to support each other. We were talking just before we went live that I work in men's ministry a little bit as well, and it's a group called the Band of Christian Brothers, and it's again more here in the Greater Toronto area, but I'm sure that there's similar kind of groups around. I've heard, and I think that it comes up out of the States. That man is you.
Okay.
I've heard of this, and I've heard good things that come out of that. And so finding a group, and if there isn't one, then founding a group. And if people are interested to contact me about this, go ahead and drop me a line, and we can go through that. Because I've done two now. Because we moved parishes 3 years ago, so I did one in my former parish, and then when we moved here, just after settling in and getting to know people, and just offering them. And you'd be surprised how many people, how many men are really looking for that. The Knights of Columbus is a good place to start with finding men like that. And then even within the Knights of Columbus, to do the faith formation process of that. So that, and being courageous about it. We're talking about just having that courage to be who you are in the midst of everything that's going on. But sanity will prevail. In the end, Our Lady has said, in the end, her Immaculate Heart will triumph. So we need to have that quiet confidence, but we still need to get in there. And like I said, come to the Immortal Combat Conference, go through the talks that are here, find other platforms that are out there as well. And whether it's video, or I'm a bibliophile, so constantly reading. And then maybe that's my, if I remember afterwards on the Facebook page, we'll put out, what are guys reading to help bolster their spiritual strength. But that brotherhood is key, and having
that is true.
At least one, but a growing group to help support each other in that adventure in growing our knowledge.
I think if you're all looking for additional formation, Catholic Answers is one of the best out there for sure in terms of the amount of video content that they put out, small snippets from their radio shows. So it makes it easy to search for things. So if you're looking for ways to continue your formation and you don't have a lot of money, there's a lot of research and a lot of just questions and answers that are there. So do check out Catholic Answers.
Them, and as you're saying that, the other one is, for me, a lot of my downtime is in the car, commuting. Right? So EWTN radio, I'll listen to.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So depending on where the Lighthouse Catholic Ministry, the Augustine Institute, the CDs. So you have to find where you're comfortable with learning, whether it's the videos, the CDs, the podcasts.
And as you've pointed out, yes, there is this conference, but I think more importantly than the conference are the individual men speakers who are here. And if one of them, you like their approach, you like how they talk about stuff, go ahead and follow them. Follow their Facebook, join their mailing list. You don't have to buy stuff immediately if you're not ready. Just listen, ask them questions. They are there for you. So I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, and hopefully, I can say this. I'll speak from my own self, but from watching a few of the other guys' talks as well. We're on this journey as much as anyone, right? And we're just Catholic gentlemen trying to figure it out as well. And sure, we put ourselves out there as speakers, and sure, we kind of put our name and our face on the line, but we still get up and go to work like everyone else. Have families or follow vocations. So just because we're the ones doing the talking doesn't mean, it just means we like to hear the sound of our own voice, really. It doesn't mean that we're bigger or better than anyone else. So like you're saying, just to get in touch with the speakers that you feel an affinity to.
And I think there's a great segue, because there are many different kinds of men, and we are attracted to different roles of manhood. Some are very kind of muscle bound and rah-rah, the Bear Wozniak kind of thing. And then there's others that are more introverted and quiet, professorial, So great question from Omar. Hi, how can you determine an authentic manhood? Maybe we'll start there. How can you determine an authentic manhood? Any initial thoughts there?
I think an authentic manhood. Wow, that's a huge question.
Yeah. And let's just maybe clarify, it doesn't necessarily relate to
it's
being
not.
a specific kind
Yeah,
of guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's not. I mean, the world will have you, and anything I'm answering, I'm just going to be repeating Dave Denuzzo's talk when he talks about being a Christ-centered man or a me-centered man.
There you go. Go ahead.
So like that, I think that would be probably the best place to look at that. But authentic manhood, responsible. So picking up the responsibility, uh, looking after your family, following the vocation, following the call that God has called you on.
Yeah.
So as Dave talks about, like the media, what you see in the mass media as being portrayed uh, as what is manly and what is masculine.
Chris Hemsworth, you know.
And that could be a part of who you are, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be. And it's more about, where is Christ calling me? What has God the Father asked me to do? And that's where that notion of responsibility and sacrifice and being sacrificial.
Yes, I think so too.
Right?
You know what I think is a great corollary between, let's say, the Avengers. Think of all the men Avengers and all the different superheroes, and you think of all of the men presenting at this conference. Very different kinds of people, but even among all of them, I think the answer to an authentic manhood, this question, is two things, and we find it with Christ on the cross. Don't be afraid to love, and to love deeply. I think as men, we are often very careful, very guarded about what we choose, what we choose to love, and then how much. Maybe we're very private about that. So how you choose to express that is, of course, up to you and your charisms, your vocation. But one, don't be afraid to love. Christ loved and continues to love every single one of us with a unique and a deep intensity. And then what follows from that is the hardest one: don't be afraid to sacrifice, because true love immediately means a deep sense of sacrifice and service to others, whether it's your family, your community, your wife, your siblings, just the other people on your team, your classmates. We as men do not like to sacrifice, because that means being vulnerable, maybe not being seen as the top dog, the cool guy. But then you find the Pope, who's like the biggest cheese on the planet, religiously speaking, and he calls himself, I am the servant of the servants of God. Christ, our chief, commander in chief, washed the feet of his disciples. And ultimately, everybody in a position of power is not there to lord it over others, but to promote the betterment of everybody who's following him. That takes incredible sacrifice. And so be prepared. I would think, be prepared to love deeply, and then be prepared to sacrifice for that which you love.
And both of those are so countercultural in our day. That call to love deeply, but again, the way the world puts forth masculinity is, don't show weakness, don't show emotion, don't show that you care, be standoffish and aloof, and so that in and of itself is countercultural. And then also the notion of sacrifice, because from an early age we're told you can be whoever you want, you can do whatever you want, don't let anyone tell you what to do. Right? And so it goes against that pride that has been cultured or has been nurtured in us to be sacrificial. And it's something I know I need to be reminded of constantly. There'll be times I can catch myself and remind myself, and then there's other times where it's only afterwards. It's like, oh, I could have dealt with that better. I could have been more sacrificial.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Let's take maybe just one last minute, and we'll answer the last question here from Aswin. And it's a huge question. And actually, John Welch, I think he's giving a talk today, or it has already happened, on the porn, which is the fight for your life. And it was such a valuable topic that he went and gave a whole hour talk, basically,
Okay,
over
wow.
just the 15 minutes, because it is so needed, especially at a men's conference. So maybe if you have a quick thought to share with us, Aswin asks, how to battle porn and lust. Any quick thoughts, and then I'll share mine.
On the second half of that, how to battle lust, because and it's the lust that then leads into looking at the porn.
Yeah.
Simple prayer, simple
Mhm.
prayer. Lord, thank you for the beauty of your creation. Keep me from temptation.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing wrong in at least I feel there's nothing wrong in recognizing the beauty
Mhm.
of creation. But again, it's then how you then use it, or how you linger on it. So,
Yeah.
and the sin is not in the temptation. The sin is letting it linger.
Right.
So,
Right.
uh, yeah, that's actually a prayer I turn to often. Lord, thank you for the beauty of your creation.
Mhm.
Keep me from temptation. And it comes back to what we were speaking when we were answering Omar's question about Omar or Russell. I'll continue formations, guys. So it's Russell's question, how to continue, um, is finding that brotherhood that you can trust, that can support you
Mhm.
through that. It takes discipline.
Mhm.
You need to make that decision, and you can't beat yourself up if you fall, if you stumble,
Mhm.
and the sacrament of reconciliation.
Yes.
Right? And the more often you're able to get to the sacrament of reconciliation. And I know there was another talk, and I can't remember it. I'm going to watch it today. How to deal with habitual sin. I haven't seen the talk yet, but just from my own experience, knowing that getting to confession helps eventually, and it's not an overnight
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah. Very, very good. Thank you. A lot of good points to unpack there. I know for me, growing up, something I struggled with as well. Like I think a lot of men, most of us do. Huge thing for me was actually I discovered the power of my guardian angel one day. I don't remember what I read, but I was encouraged just pray to him, ask him to step in and uh, and help out. I think it was Padre Pio, Saint Padre Pio, who would say this little prayer to your guardian angel: know my thoughts, calm my mind and my heart. And the thing about the angelic world is that they can never know what is in your mind. It's like absolutely private to you unless you give them permission, whether evil or good. That is your interior world. So if you invite your guardian angel to know your thoughts, to come in, sometimes he can help change the direction of a thought. He can inspire a thought, can stop you from thinking
Yeah,
something wrong. That's why we pray the guardian angel prayer: rule and guide me. You are given to me for a reason. So if you're not asking your angel for help with your thoughts, and then want his help. So I remember, like as a kid, and hey, I fell a ton, but I would ask him, you know, please take this temptation, this thought away from me. Help me with it. And all of a sudden, I remember the day that it was like the temptation, the thought disappeared from my mind completely, and I was left standing there thinking, wait a second, I had a thought there a minute ago. I was actively thinking of, I was troubled by something.
mhm.
And that was completely gone. And I remember being so blown away. I went and asked my mom and told her about that. And she didn't, we weren't used to actually realizing they will step in right then and there.
Yeah,
They will help. So ask your guardian angel. They're at your side,
yeah.
constantly.
And listen to them when they speak. And that comes to the and that kind of comes to the other point there, as you were talking, and that's that avoiding the near occasion to sin, and that
Yeah.
and avoiding that temptation. So as you were cognizant that that thought was forming in your mind, asking your guardian angel to help you avoid
Hmm.
that near occasion to sin,
Yeah.
and then listening to him when he
Hmm.
spoke to you.
Yep. There's a little allegory or anecdote from the Middle Ages where I think it was the Muslims were visiting one of the Crusaders, and they asked him a demonstration of strength or something like that. And I think they weren't taking him seriously in the negotiations. And so he pulled out his sword and he hacked off the head of a camel in one stroke. And they were so blown away that a human mortal could have that much strength. And they asked him, what is the source of your strength? And he said, it's chastity. You know, chastity, the constant interior battle to overcome, you know, my inclination to sin and to want to be pure as a man gives me an incredible sense of strength and purpose. And I think we see Christ in the scriptures saying, heaven is something that the violent bear away, not just the milk toast, but it takes an incredible amount of violence interiorly. And that's why this conference is a fantastic topic. It is a combat, not with the world, primarily with yourself. And it is a battle, as Chesterton said, it's a duel to the death.
Yes.
Every single day. It's like Groundhog Day for every single one of us to learn
very
to
much so. Yeah.
Very good. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for everyone who is with us here on the call. If you have any additional questions, you can drop them in over the next couple of days. Robert may jump back in and have a look.
Go back in and take a look for those if they're there. And after you watch the talk this afternoon, if there's any questions from that as well, just to put them in the comment box, either on the talk or put them in the comment box here on the Facebook feed. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again, Robert, and thanks to all of the men who have participated in this conference. Literally could not have done this without you. So God bless you, and have a fantastic rest of your week.